I've been given a mission to carry a torch for my tribe to go and then try to return value to. And that's the thing that I think it still exists, but it's harder to find in a peacetime army.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And one of the big problems that I think folks have is they get complacent, businesses in particular, and their services and the value they add. And as we were just discovering, the tool that we use, and we'll give them a shout out, Riverside, it's just added some new features. So good on them, as long as they don't crash us in figuring out these new features, right, Camden?
Yeah, that's the hope here because it's a little bit shinier now, which makes you feel like it's going to break always, right? When things are a little too shiny, it feels like something's going to break.
Yep. Our guest, Patrick Flood, joining us, and he's used to having too many features in his rucksack, a brother from the regiment, carrying around features and wondering what the hell value that feature is providing me. Right, Patrick?
That's right. It's you never know what you're going to need, so you try to pack as much as you can, either in the vehicle or in your rucksack. That's for sure.
Vehicle? What freaking group were you in that you riding around in a pickup truck?
I was in Afghanistan for about 4.5 years, and so things are a little spread out. And instead of having the opportunity to fly around as much, we drove most of the places that we went, and then we went dismounted, so it was a little bit more effective.
Oh, okay. We won't. But you were motorized, not armorized, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I won't make too many snide comments about that lifestyle because I lived that lifestyle for a little while too. So, Patrick, man, it is great to have you. And I want to start off right off the bat so people hear the name of the organization that you've started, not getting started, Owners in Honor. And tell us what's going on with Owners in Honor, please.
Right. So Owners in Honor is a 501c3 disabled veteran founded nonprofit whose focus is veteran entrepreneurship through acquisition. In short, to help veterans purchase small businesses or businesses of any size, really, but mostly small businesses. And for us, our main purpose is to provide education and risk mitigation. As you know, Otis, very important things as we're doing our PCCs and PCIs to make sure that we don't just go launching out of the firebase without checking everything first. Sometimes those people in our community and other veterans are extraordinarily self-confident, sometimes to a fault. And our job is to really make sure that they succeed.
All right, Camden, your test, PCC, PCI.
So I was guessing because I don't actually know it, but pre-combat check, pre-combat inspection.
Damn, I'm trading that boy well.
Woo! Hey, I've been on the show long enough. There we go.
He's heard enough of the war stories.
Yes, sir. Patrick, one of the things that I think is interesting, talking about acquisitions there, is that almost is, Dad, you're talking about coaching market being flooded. We talk about consultant being kind of a dirty word. Coach kind of became that dirty word. Acquisitions. That's one that has some baggage with it to some folks. Could you talk a little bit about maybe just some of what it is, what it isn't? Because that's one that, I don't think I tend to think of like the Blackstones and like that kind of stuff. I don't think of, somebody getting out of the army and going and buying a, mechanic shop down the road.
Right. Yeah. So mergers and acquisitions is really just the blanket term of somebody buying something that's commercial. So, and it's also the legal framework that binds all of those deals together. But for us, our goal is actually, quite frankly, to be the counter narrative or the unconventional approach or irregular approach to counter what you're talking about is a lot of the private equity firms doing roll-ups or aggregating businesses. And those, for the most part, are predatory firms that are looking at taking a lot of our aging business owners waiting until they're aged out for the most part and very motivated to sell because they haven't developed some sort of exit strategy or succession strategy. Not to mention the fact that they've been working at that business sometimes for 3 decades, and they've tied a lot of their personal worth and identity into the business itself. And so where we're approaching it is, instead of saying, we understand that you are very motivated to sell and therefore willing to sell for a fraction of the fair market value, for us, it's to provide a fair market value for the seller and provide a very prepared buyer for them so that we can transition those businesses to our veterans and have that community impact, that business remain as a legacy business. So really our goal is, a lot of these businesses you hear a lot of times are generational businesses. So they were handed down potentially from a grandparent to a child to then or to a child and then now looking to their children. And we are trying to create another option for them, instead of giving the business to their child, to actually give it to a veteran. And then once it's in our program for veterans, then it's really transitioning it from one veteran to another, because we're never going to run out of generational talent in that case.
Oh, I think that talent is a key piece to that, because for so many years, and I was one of those who did that. Unless you were kind of an anomaly, really, you retired and then you went into the government contracting space. And truthfully, it's easy to do, right? Because you're basically doing the same thing you were doing in uniform
Mm-hmm.
for a contractor, and truthfully, there's a little bit of tie back to the regiment still needs me sort of thing. You feel like you're still given. So I think that's part of the hurdle that I think that you with Owners in Honor are having to overcome, because I think it. The guys that I work with, I always tell them, that whole government contracting world. It's a great world. It's a great space. It's a great fallback, and I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
it fallback and to belittle it. I mean it's hey, do you want to check something else out and maybe explore? When you retired, you didn't step right into Owners in Honor. What were the areas that you stepped into that have kind of pushed you into this direction?
Right. So while I was a battalion commander, I had the opportunity, because I was a recruiting battalion commander, so non-deployable. I had the opportunity to really set out my 2-year calendar. And during that period, I was encouraged by one of my mentors to go to business school during that time, if I could get into a good business school and then be able to dedicate myself to that amount of time and effort. And I had the opportunity to apply to Duke, the Fuqua School of Business, very veteran friendly program. Got in, figured out how to pay for it. Post 9/11 job bill paid for a chunk of it. There is still, and similar to a lot of stuff, there needs to be some skin in the game to feel some worth. So I still had to pay for quite a bit. And what was great is that I was able to take the weekend MBA program, which delivers the same degree as the daytime program, because it provides the same amount of instruction, same number of hours. But at the same time, I was required to have a full-time job. I was required to have 10 years of work experience. And it made me be very disciplined about what I was doing with my time. And to their point, when they talk about the weekend MBA program, there's a lot of Monday morning dividends that you come back and apply directly to your current role. And so when I was in recruiting command, we went from ranked somewhere around 30 plus out of 42 battalions. And in the first 18 months that I was there, we went from 32 to number one for 18 months. And I contribute a big part of that to actually going to business school at the same time, developing a secondary network, et cetera. And then when I decided to transition out of the military, I had the opportunity, because I went through a different transition organization called the Honor Foundation. And really, they engaged me about developing my network, doing cups of coffee. You get a coach for life, and they help you understand your purpose and really get ready to engage in some sort of corporate job. And because I went to a good school, I had a fair number of job offers for
Mhm.
officers with advanced degrees, and ended up taking a job in the financial services sector with Anderson, which is a tax consulting firm. And I was the director of the practice management group for the Southern California offices. So the offices in Los Angeles, Orange County, and now San Diego.
So what was it? What was it there that then led you down this path of being going down the entrepreneurial path from there?
Sure. So two things. One, it's selfish. So the first selfish thing is that working, even though I was being paid well, I didn't feel the same sense of satisfaction that I think is the other reason, Otis, that our people from the regiment go back into government contracting, is that they want to be part of the same network that they were in before, even if they're not giving back directly to the regiment, but they don't have to remake their reputation. They've gone through a lot of crucibles that have proved their mettle to a lot of different people, and people understand where their values are and also what their integrity is. And when you go into the corporate world, you have to remake all of that stuff all over again. And sometimes, depending on the corporate environment, there are some corporate environments that I would submit are a little bit less favorable for the veteran concept, because there's a lot of baggage that unfortunately uh, the veteran is carrying with him now as he goes into the corporate world. Of everyone has PTSD, everyone's homeless, especially working out of Los Angeles. That was the big push, and it's great. Los Angeles has done a great job in cleaning up the veteran homeless issue. There, I think, are very few veteran homeless people, but the way they did that is through a lot of advocacy. So there's in people's backs of people's minds is that there's a lot of people with some significant mental health problems. And so there was that. And then the second part was I was part of the Honor Foundation's panels as other special operators were going through the transition program. And I was noticing that there was this segment of, in my opinion, the special operations community that wasn't finding the purposeful opportunity that optimized their skill set through that type of transition program. They wanted to be entrepreneurs. They wanted to be their own boss. The opportunities that they were being presented were typically a venture entrepreneur, or come up with a new idea and we'll see if we can connect with somebody who can fund it. Or it was the corporate development, corporate placement sort of engagement that was also a really great opportunity for them. And the Honor Foundation just really does a bang up job in doing all that stuff, along with organizations like the Commit Foundation and the Special Operators Transition Foundation, just phenomenal. When I was listening to during the panels, I was noticing that especially among the non-commissioned officer community, there were a lot of men and women that didn't have the opportunity to get their 4-year degree because they'd been deployed so much. So in their mind, it was seen as an impediment for them to be able to get that opportunity to get the interview with the corporate partner of the Honor Foundation. So where were they going to go? And they also didn't have a blue ocean idea to create some sort of new product. So they asked the question, and one of them, the avatar, is a senior chief who was a special boat team guy, said, "How are you going to help me?" And there wasn't a really clear answer at the time. And so I took that as sort of a call to action, and then talked to some of the people that I had met through financial services and also through my business school. And then on top of that, a lot of the veterans that I knew who had gone into entrepreneurship, and asked them what their experiences were. And it was really interesting. So there were a lot of folks that had helped people, but it was always ad hoc. It was always one off. And there wasn't an aggregation, to use that word again, of experience that then could be delivered to the veterans who are interested in it. So there was a lot of blood and treasure and sweat that was being expended by the individual entrepreneur. There was never a platform for them to share it in any meaningful way with the next man up. And so if you've gone and, for those people who have done it, if you've gone and gotten an SBA loan, if you've gone and figured out how to get someone to finance you, if you've gone and looked for businesses, if you've done that, the likelihood that you're going to do it multiple times in your life is really low. So you're probably going to do it once. And if that experience is bad, which it is for 90% of the people that do it, then you're never going to do it again. And so who advocates for those people? And, so there was, does it make sense to have consultancy do it to help them through it, or does it make sense as a nonprofit? And so for us, in our eyes, it made more sense as a nonprofit, because this isn't something that we want to do to create individual personal wealth. It's really to be able to have an exponential wealth creation opportunity within the veteran community, specifically the special operations veteran community, because of the opportunity cost that they have missed out on from having been deployed and really being laser focused on the men in the mission for the last 20 years. And so how can we level those scales? And that's really what my purpose is, and if anything, what my calling is.
Before you go, Dad, I got one kind of just quicker little bit of like a hypothetical that I just thought was kind of interesting as you were talking there, Patrick, of the idea of, the opportunity cost of like missing out on the 4-year degree to go serve your country, the men in the mission, as you put it. Well, if you were hiring somebody, if you even actually no, take out the hiring aspect. If we're just looking at somebody to go buy a business and, go be an entrepreneur like that, take this path. Would you take somebody with a 4-year degree or 8 years of military service? There's obviously the vocab words we always joke about that come with a degree and that kind of stuff. But I mean, honestly, Patrick, I want to throw it over to you. What are your thoughts there? Because that's got to be a pretty darn comparable at the end of the day, I would guess, the lack of vocab words versus the real life experience.
Yeah. So I'll take that question and raise you a question. So the real question is, and it's been posed to me several times in this process as we engage veterans, because they see my resume. So they see that I have an MBA. And they're like, hey, I don't have an MBA. I don't know if I could run a business. And I say to them, to be honest, that is probably, at the size of business that we're looking to acquire, that is going to be more of a handicap than it's going to be something, because it's going to give you a false sense of security that isn't going to actually help rubber meet the road. And so whether you have a 4-year degree that focused on, business administration, or you have 8 years of just strictly military experience, the issue is that you have to care about people, because the businesses that we're looking at are usually valued at less than $5 million. So you're looking at typically less than 20 employees. So you have to care about people. And that factors into not just your employees, but also your customers. So they're all customer businesses, most of which are home services companies. So you have to care about your people in 2 ways. So one is your people, one is your customer, which ends up being your people. And then the third way that you need to care about people is that you are integrated into your community in a way that a $50 million business is never going to be integrated in the community. Is that you are, and this comes also from the owners that we were polling and interviewing before we launched this, is to say, when you sold your business to a private equity firm, what were the dividends that ended up coming out of it? Were there financial benefits? Were there time benefits? What were the benefits? And what was interesting is that most of them actually talked about the negative parts of actually that came out of it, is that they sold their business for a fraction of the value of the business. They didn't get enough money to exit the community entirely. So they were still within their community. Their business had more often than not been shuttered, or they had to go to auction because they couldn't find a seller. And now they were still going to the same grocery store, the same church, the same community events with all of their former customers, who are now misunderstood how much they got out of the sale. And so we're very angry with them in a lot of ways. And in a lot of cases, we're begging them to come back into the industry. And this goes for plumbers, electricians, people that own the dental clinics, people that own smaller clinics, HVAC services, because all of those people have been the people that have been responding to people's problems or crises for potentially the last 30 years, especially within, communities. And so they were looking at the psychological impact. And which also was interesting to us to see the parallel between the veteran negative psychological impact of leaving an organization that had been tied to your identity for 20 years and a business owner leaving an organization that has been tied to your identity for 20 years. And then could we provide purpose to both communities? And really that's where the name came from, is Owners and Honor, is that there's an honorific between the two of them. So really you're honoring the legacy of the business, and then the business owner is honoring the legacy of, or the service that really has been contributed by that veteran. To answer your question in a more succinct way, you need help either way, and you need a network either way to limit the likelihood that you're going to fail 3 times, which is typically the moniker.
So thanks for that, because what it's got me thinking is, what are the characteristics you're looking for? You know, I was at a business conference, a chief systems conference this past weekend, and you see it in some folks and you don't see it in others. And somebody asked a panel of owners, entrepreneurs, you know, how do you know? And I think that was a really interesting thing. My buddy Jason, another veteran who was on the panel, said, it takes me 30 seconds and I know whether or not somebody should be an entrepreneur or should go get a job. And there's nothing wrong with it, right? We need all, I mean, entrepreneurs need people to work for them. If we're all entrepreneurs, that would be, things would be a little difficult, right? So what kind of characteristics have you identified, and is there any specific tie back to their military training? You know, like Green Berets that have done this, or you know, you use the Avatar or Special Boat Team senior chief. You know, how those, have you seen anything in that?
So I'll start with the Avatar and work out. So I would submit that the characteristics that are very common in various military organizations that focus on partnering and educating, I think, are the ones that are really good fits. One is that you have to be, in some of the characteristics that are common among that community. One is lifelong learner. So taking someone who's always willing to learn and is never so fixated on their own ego that they can't be wrong. And that, you know, goes into a lot of the training that I think you and I both got as Green Berets, Otis. I can't speak exactly to all the training that all the different special operations organizations go through. I know that our training in Marine Raiders is very similar, but is that you have to go with humble respect to your partner and allow them to teach you about the thing that they're great at. So a great example is going to Peru, having experienced a tremendous amount of combat within Afghanistan, and the Peruvian military initially saying, how could you advise us? You've never worked in triple canopy jungle at altitude. And I was like, you're right. And I'm here to learn about how you're doing that. And then I can tell you a little bit more about how we do joint planning, how we do joint communications, how we do, you know, things that apply to any environment. And really, I want to understand what it is that you see as obstacles or pitfalls so that then I get better. And at the same time, I'm allowing them to be an expert. And so that's part of it. So lifelong learning. Another part of it is you have to be relatively risk tolerant, but in the sense of I am willing to jump out of an Air Force aircraft that of which there are no perfectly good ones. And to then, in order to do so, I know that here are the things that I need to do along the way to mitigate my risk. I'm going to do something that's potentially catastrophic. If it goes badly, it'll go real badly. And so in order to do that, I am disciplined in my approach and understanding how I can mitigate that risk. But at the same time, I'm not afraid of the risk. So that's another part of it. Another part of it would be a desire to, especially in entrepreneurship for a small business, a desire to intermesh your personal life and the business. So there's some people that like really enjoy the compartmentalization of different businesses. I worked in financial services, and granted, we worked a lot of hours in the week, but when I was off, I was off. And so I didn't, no one was calling me with a, tax consulting financial emergency on a Sunday. But if you're running an HVAC company, there will be times. Great example is that one of the companies that we're familiar with here in Houston, because of the recent storms that happened here, like they have to drop everything and help their customers. And you have to be within a family structure and a personal structure, personal mindset that you're able to do that you can prioritize sometimes someone else's needs over your own family's. And so a lot of that mindset comes from the first responder community, whether that's a person in the military or whether that's a person who is a policeman, fireman, you know, paramedic. Like all of those are the same. Is that, and then you need to expand out from that to say, my family is signing up for this too. It's not just me that I'm going to go jump into the deep end of the pool. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's that all of those finances are being tied to your personal finances. Your personal reputation is tied to your family's reputation. Some people just don't want to do that. They want to keep things compartmentalized, and that's fine. The opportunity on the other side of it is that you have to be comfortable with planning wealth strategies and personal financial strategies, and you have to be aggressively educating yourself on that all the time. Uh, because no matter how many good consultants or advisors you have, just like I think you and I were probably both told when we entered the military, you're the best advocate for your own career. And so while there are personnel people, while there are finance people, while there are people that's their specialty, if you're not advocating for yourself by understanding how the process works, you're always creating a sense of vulnerability within what it is that you're trying to create.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said for, the we talk about it in terms of leadership. That you can only lead others to the level that you're able to lead yourself. I think that's very true in a financial sense too. The CEO with a gambling problem every weekend might be taking some money. You might be able to read between the lines on that. I'm curious to kind of add another layer to this. Something that we've talked about before, Dad, with you and with other Green Berets on the show, is the idea of like the small army versus big army. And I don't know how common that term is. I know I've heard you use that term, Dad. But the idea of like inside of these operator communities, it's very different than what the kind of big conglomerate is doing. Patrick, do you think there's much of a difference in like the or actually really to round out the thought, I'm wondering if there's a connection from those to different types of these roles that you're talking about. For instance, I could see somebody functioning in that more smaller community being a much more effective entrepreneur because it's smaller, it's more ownership over it, whereas somebody in big army might make a very good manager, very good kind of like operator of it rather than necessarily the actual entrepreneurship. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think it depends. So that like Big Army has things that we don't have. So the Big Army has construction engineers. They have people that whose MOS is a plumber, and so they have people that come with a technical expertise that is unmatched within the special operations community. Um, on the other hand, especially looking at the small businesses, typically those larger Army organizations are very well logistically supported, and in a special operations team, the expectation is that you're very self-sustained. So you have reached back, of course, to larger commissioning units, but for the most part, you're expected to work in some sort of expeditionary environment where you're getting a lot of stuff as is available to you from the local community or the local environment. And so it's a slightly different skill set. Maybe one comes with more technical expertise. And so what we would do is we put everyone through an assessment, they get assigned a coach, and then we understand what their skill set is. So if it is one that, hey, they're very technically they're technically expert at whatever business that they're interested in, which is helpful, then we make sure that then they're balanced with a coach who's really helping them be a little bit more experiential, hands-on, a little bit more extroverted, a little bit more lean forward into leadership than maybe they were before in an organization that was more bureaucratic. Conversely, if you come from a special operations environment, you probably have leadership of small teams in spades that no one else has. You have flattened communication down like a science. And so, really, for the special operator, a lot of times it's now can you focus on a single thing to become a technical expert in that one thing instead of being a jack of all trades, master of none, even though the rest of that phrase is more complicated. But we are really very skilled at being a jack of all trades and not necessarily a master builder or a master anything. So we are highly adaptable, but sometimes that also means that we're not the best tool ever. We're sort of a multi-tool at times.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. There's one other thing that I think um, most special operators bring, particularly in the Green Beret realm, is you feel comfortable with autonomy.
Hmm.
And in the big machine, the big corporate machine, I mean, and I felt this at Lockheed Martin because Lockheed Martin is
Mhm.
very much like a military organization. And the you're part of that bigger, it's like a big army job. It really felt like that. So there was some comfort in that. But there was also the bureaucracy and the loss of autonomy that I'd had even in the joint headquarters that I'd been in for the previous 6-7 years prior to retirement. I still had a lot of autonomy in that, and I think that is a great characteristic because having that autonomy means that I don't have to be told what to do. I can go do something, and that's a great thing. I think you hit on some good pieces of depending on the industry. Those Sunday afternoon, the rainstorm, the heat dome, whatever the news is labeling
Yeah.
the catastrophic cats and dogs raining in and Noah's Ark and all those sort of things. And yes, I will make fun of the news forever and a day about those sort of things. Storm alert! But anyway, it is the operator. There's a reason we refer to them as operators. It's because that's what they do. They operate. They go get things done.
Yeah.
And they know how to do it and what level to perform at. And the level they perform at is always the top level. I think that's some of the greatness that goes with it. Uh, I had a thought because, and I want to get your opinion on this because I feel a little bit naive about it, but that naivety may have just been the era that I came from. Do you feel, uh, and you've only been retired what, 2 years now, 3 years?
A little, just about 3 years.
Okay, 3 years. Do you feel that there's been a shift in the men and women, and let's just say in the special ops community,
Mhm.
because of your THF experience, the men and women of the special ops community are starting to migrate into more business ownership, entrepreneurship, or is that just my perception standing over here looking out?
Yeah. So it's funny that you bring that up. So I just did a event, like a transition event that I was invited to at the 7th Special Forces Group down in Eglin. And one of the things I talked about, so a friend of mine was my senior Delta or senior medical sergeant on my team was the group sergeant major a couple years ago. He just retired. And when I was talking to him about, and Otis, your experience, I'd be interested to get, because I think you would have interesting insight into this that I wouldn't have as much of, is that the difference between a peacetime army and an army at war. And I think that's part of it. I think that's a big part of it, is that at the very beginning, so I was in Operation Enduring Freedom 1, and it was everyone I deployed with. I was a support officer at the time, as a communications officer in third group. there wasn't a human in the active military, I think, at that point who had any combat experience. There was, conflict that had happened a couple of different places, but no one had been in, full spectrum combat since Vietnam. And most of those people from the Vietnam era had aged out at that point. There were maybe a couple of remnants in the National Guard, but that was about it. And so most of us had joined a peacetime army, and a lot of us probably wouldn't have stayed in the army, much less special operations, if we would have stayed at peace. Because I think there's a certain group of people that gravitate toward the special operations forces because they do like autonomy. They thrive in autonomous environments. They thrive in environments where you have to assume risk. They thrive in environments where there isn't a defined left and right limits. You have to define it yourself. They thrive in it. And in a peacetime army or military, it's typically very bureaucratic and it's very risk averse because they're really trying to prevent major accidents. And so and also it's really difficult to measure success. And so what I've noticed is that I would submit that the global war on terror veteran, especially those folks who came in the later stages of the conflict, one, I think the Army is having a retention problem, even special operations community, because of the lack of autonomy they have now. And so everything got reined back in. And instead of being, the one special forces team that was somewhere out in Eastern or Western Afghanistan, and it was you and your partner, and then occasionally you'd get mail from like the DEA who would drop off mail, to now you're going on a training mission and you fall under a global combatant command and you fall under big army and you fall under, so-and-so and so-and-so. And there's levels and levels and levels of bureaucracy. And now it's edging closer and closer to a zero defect army that you probably remember. And I would submit that I would have not stayed in the army for 10 years, much less 24 years, if we would have stayed a peacetime army. And so that same personality, and Camden, going back to your question, do I find characteristics that are most predominant within the special operations community? Yes. And I think that is extraordinarily predominant within the first responder community of people that raised their hand knowing that they were going to war. Yeah. I think there is a lot of similarity and characteristics, value, purpose, finding your why, all of that stuff I think that there is a really strong correlation between those two types of people. And part of the reason that we're really excited about the paradigm that's happening right now with both the numbers of the baby boomer generation that are retiring, and then also all of these, GWAT veterans that are now looking after they've worked for a government contracting firm or they've been in commercial or financial services or some other thing. They're now realizing that they need to, have a community, a tribe, to talk about tribe and purpose, not to hit the nail too hard in the head, but they need a tribe and they want more autonomy. But they want autonomy in the sense that I have been given a mission to carry a torch for my tribe to go and then try to return value to them. And that's the thing that I think it still exists, but it's harder to find in a peacetime army. And that I'm willing to bet the Jason that you were talking about is the thing that you can see in someone's eyes. Is that after, my first time in combat, I was like, hey, if you have the right number of badges and you went to the right, schools and you're the right rank, I just assume you're going to be good at this. And after going to combat for a lot of times, I don't take any of those assumptions at face value anymore, but you do start seeing the look and the seriousness around some people's demeanor when you're talking about things serious. And they're the folks that were doing JSETs or some other thing during the time that took it as a training opportunity instead of a morale weekend or a morale 3 months. Like they were looking at it as, how do I take the opportunity that I have in the latitude I've been given to do training in a different country to apply that training to make sure that my men come home alive. Those are the guys that are going to be good entrepreneurs. And
Yeah, they are, because
I can see them when they walk through the door now. And it's similar to what you were saying with Jason.
yeah.
I was just going to say, what's interesting is, there's this, to use a different example for it, because I think it paints a picture a little bit, about the like self-selection, which, Patrick, I know you're talking about in the green room a little bit about that kind of a problem and trying to get people to self-select in for things. One of the interesting things in like development economics and these kind of things is the immigration patterns to the U.S. and how we get, a lot of the time we get the people who self-select in because it's like, I am going to go start a business, and they have this same entrepreneurial mindset. Not all the time, of course, but it does kind of tend to track that way. And then you get this interesting problem where then you don't have as many of those people still there, and that's a whole rabbit hole. But the self-selection aspect, Dad, you talk about Green Berets being triple volunteers. That's a triple self-selection where you are showing how much you think that way. And I think that's why it's such a good predictor. Of course, it's correlation, not causation, of course. But that triple volunteer is a very interesting way of looking at that triple self-selection there.
That's right. And that I would submit to that, Otis, I'm interested in your take on this, is that there are then some people who come into special forces, and instead of wanting to be Lawrence of Arabia, they want to kick indoors and for lack of a better term, shoot people in the face. And they mischaracterize a lot of the development of indigenous militaries or security forces as handing out flip-flops and MREs. And I would submit also that a lot of the guys that then gravitated toward either a different selection program or a different specialized unit within special forces were the guys that then, same thing, self-selected out of being that super hyper community focused guy. And they were focused more on, I want to work in a unit that is extraordinarily well supported, extraordinary, plus or minus, 60 seconds. And we have, a lot of training and a lot of, really narrowing the focus to one specific thing and really becoming experts at that. That's interesting. I'm going to have to think about that. But and I'd like to hear your take on that, Otis. If you think, in your experience with other entrepreneurs, do you think that there is potentially a different from those guys that, sometimes use special forces as a stepping stone to something else?
Yeah, I think there is. But there's different parts. There are a lot of guys who go down that path because that's the sexy. That was the way we always referred to it. They want to be the sexy. And the folks, if you don't know what I mean, they're the guys with all the latest and greatest kit, the latest and greatest training. Like Patrick said, they are fully supplied, and it's amazing, and they've earned that. They've quite literally walked the path to get there. So there's no ding on it. But what the core of being a Green Beret is just dirty work. There's nothing sexy about it. Your job as a Green Beret is to work yourself out of a job. It's to, give it away, teach somebody how to do it. I always refer to it as, the Huck Finn, whitewashing the fence. I don't want to whitewash the fence. So guess what? If I can get you to whitewash the fence, I can go sit underneath the shade tree. Or really, I can go to some other country and do some other things, is generally what it means. And I think going back to the whole point that we're walking down this road of the entrepreneur, I have a couple of friends who took the walk and they are in the entrepreneur space, but they're their entrepreneurial venture is very much different
Mhm.
than the dirty work, grind it out, almost as a using that organization to launch from, which you use all your assets. I've seen that. Whereas the quote white soft green beret uh, is used to doing the dirty work.
Mhm.
And one of the things, and we snicker about it all the time, because people are like, Green Berets, are y'all like SEALs? Yeah, just like SEALs, right? Because everybody knows what a SEAL is. Not many people know what a Green Beret is, and there's a reason for that, the quiet professional and all that sort of stuff. But I'll tell you, if you're looking for somebody who can get the job done, uh, with autonomy, uh, I would much rather, because I've worked with all kinds, both in the military and in business. And I'll admit, yeah, I'm biased, but boy, I'd much rather take a Green Beret and drop them into a problem set and say, "Hey, man, go. Here's your guidance." Like you said earlier, guys that want to figure out what my thresholds are and what my left and right limits are.
Yeah, it was,
And
and it's a lot of that is that, going all the way back to one of the characteristics that I talked about being important. And obviously, this podcast focuses on it, and Tribe and Purpose in general focuses on it quite a bit, is being a lifelong learner. To even for you to admit that you're naive potentially about something is unusual among certain communities. And I think that that's the thing that a successful Green Beret, whether it's a non-commissioned officer or an officer, really has in spades. And I think, and you may know some of these stories, but I think often of there was a special forces team went to Africa and was assigned their partner. And they went to training, and the very first day, there's the big gift from the embassy of all their new kit and the new rifles and all the other stuff. And this is our new designated partner, and the U.S. is going to help do all this stuff and help combat advise you. And then the following week of training came in, and everyone showed up. They didn't have boots and they didn't have the rifles. They had sold them on the black market. And so the COCOM was extraordinarily angry and was like, well, I guess we're going to cancel training. We're going to cancel our relationship, etc. And the Green Berets on the ground decided to ask the question, why? Why did this happen? And from, sorry, did we just black out?
No, we're good.
good.
And from them, like my screen went blank for some reason. And from asking the question why, found out that the unit that they had partnered with wasn't getting paid. And that this is the first time they had something of value in a very long time. And then they traded it on the market for food for their families. So what did the Green Berets do? They figured out how to use their op fund to buy food during the training events so that people ate when they were there. Two, they utilized a lot of their human intelligent resources to go get the weapons back, which is also a different skill set that we have that sometimes other organizations do not. They developed trust within that unit, that partnered unit, because we didn't shame them. We didn't make them feel foolish. We didn't yell at them. We didn't chastise them like children. We ended up asking them, what's the actual problem? So I see this thing. Let's figure out what the problem is so I can help you solve the problem. Much more like a good parent does. Not to say that there's a parental, child relationship between us and our partners, but a good parent doesn't, one, do everything for their children, in my opinion, doesn't do everything for their children, and two, doesn't chastise their children for not doing something that they're not necessarily capable of doing. And that as a parent, your job is to be able to give enough of yourself to that child so that they can do it on their own. Just like, Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, talked about painting of the fence, is that, part of the reason you keep teaching your kid to take out the trash is partly because you don't want to take out the trash. But the other part is because it teaches them meaning, and it teaches them purpose, and it teaches them contribution and all the other stuff that comes with it. And so the more you're that kind of mindset person of let's ask a couple, let's ask, what is it? It's the 5 whys, I think, that's talked about in Franklin Covey. And so
Yeah.
ask the 5th why, and to try to figure out then what is the actual root of this, and then let's try to problem solve it around as a team so that we can all win. And then going back to that, why do Green Berets and maybe Marine Raiders gravitate toward this more than some of the other components, is that we're, of the two communities, we're fine with walking away from it at that point, saying, look at all the great stuff that our partner did. And so in the case of like an entrepreneur, it's that now you're the boss who gives credit where credit is due to the employees who did the work, which, as you know, a lot of small businesses, sometimes the leader who comes in to replace, especially if it's private equity back, going all the way back to what you were saying, Camden, doesn't really know or care half about the employees. And so if something is successful, a lot of times will take credit for the success themselves, because there is no relationship between them and their employees. So there's no reason for them to give them credit. Versus if you're tied into that, going back to the lack of ability to compartmentalize the job from your life, is that now you find a great deal of satisfaction in giving other people credit for their success.
Yeah, and I think a big component of that you kind of keep touching on a little bit, but I hadn't directly said, was like the commitment to the long term of it, like the longevity. I think is such a key piece there, because what keeps coming to mind is Angela Duckworth's book Grit. She talks about the 2 components of grit are passion and perseverance, and that perseverance is that longevity of like, hey, we're going to commit to fixing this area. I don't care if it doesn't work this year. We're going to be here till it works, and that's what you need as an entrepreneur to really keep things going. And I want to take that back and have you kind of looking inwards at your own business with Owners in Honor, or your own nonprofit there, of when you talked about it at the beginning, I thought immediately of, this is a beautiful idea. It's so great when you compare it to the private equity firms and all of that. It's a clear sales proposition. It's all awesome, all of that. So you clearly have already put all those places out of business, and you are already doing millions and millions of veterans and getting them in the right spots. Well, like, of course not. We know there's a journey there. So could you talk some about what those pitfalls are, or what it is that maybe you're kind of learning that to apply that? Because to back up a little bit, I think entrepreneurs a lot of the time have that great idea. They are like, this is perfect. This is the solution. And then they go and people don't want it. And they have to go through this process of they have to convince everybody how great the solution is and all that kind of stuff. That takes time. Could you talk a little bit about your own process with that?
Sure. Going back to lifelong learning is that the number of times I've been roasted by people who didn't have enough time to really have any profound understanding about what we were doing, or I didn't realize prior to engaging them that they saw us as a competitor, and so that's been interesting, especially people that I thought that because of having served in the military or having served in certain units, that I thought that it would be a natural fit. But then instead of going home and crying in my Wheaties about it, is to say, okay, what of what they just told me is true? And what of, because of what they just told me, I can take this opportunity to do some self-reflection and figure out how I can either pitch this better, or I can develop a better financial model, or I can develop better relationships ahead of time, or I can develop, or maybe instead of going, full frontal assault, maybe it's better to do, to raid sort of the supply trains and to get people to build a coalition before I talk to them, so that someone's talking to them before I talk to them, which is very similar to a lot of the stuff that we do in the military. Is that it's always better to have someone else ask for a favor for you than for you to do it yourself, but you have to build those coalitions. And so some of it has been, and I even had this when I was at business school, like I did not want to be like my skill set. I know what my skill set is, but I wanted to go to business school to really bear down on the finance stuff that I didn't have as a really strong skill set, and all the things, because I didn't have as much experience doing it. And then when I got to Duke, you get put on a team, and there's a couple of leadership focused people or experienced people on the team, a couple of finance people on the team, a couple of like hard skill engineers or R&D sort of people on the team. And the team is not going to function well if you don't step up and do the thing that you're good at. And so and it was the same thing even building this. I tried to, at first, I really wanted it to be as flat as possible and really get people to come in. There were, the other founders and I all, did our blood pact and said, hey, we're all going to be bearing down on this. We're all going to roll up our sleeves and do stuff. And then when we hit first contact, there were some people that were like, hey, this sounds like it's a lot more work than it's going to be financially viable for me in the next year or two. I want out. And it wasn't that, hey, here's my transition plan out. It was that, no, I just want out. I just want out. And so it's going into everything knowing that, similar to a lot of times that we go into partner relationships when we're overseas, is that as much time as we spend with our partners and as much as we imbue them with a sense of honor and integrity, you have to always put your soldiers and your mission and the United States first. And so if there is a threat, you need to be able to aggressively eliminate that threat. You can't get tied into the personality or the emotions of friendships and all the other stuff. And it's the same thing. Is that, look, you're either rowing in the same direction as with us, or maybe it's better for us to disengage as business relations, and then we can re-engage as friends, because this business relationship is probably going to bust us apart. No different than when you see husband and wife sometimes go in as partners in a business venture. More often than not, and a lot of private equity firms won't back husband and wife teams because there's too much blending of everything. And the stress is already, it's one of the biggest stresses that you can have in your life, is buying a new business or running a business. And on top of that, it's also marital stress, child stress, leaving the military stress. So all of these stresses that are like top 10 in the stress list of things that could lead to catastrophic events, it's really, how do you mitigate all that stuff? And so for me, the biggest lesson was jump out of the aircraft, but don't forget to do JMPI. Like, still mitigate your risk. Understand that there's risk involved, but don't wish it away or pretend it's not there, because it's not going to go away. It has to be something that there's a plan for it. There has to be and Green Berets do this in it better than a lot of the other special operations forces, is start building your second, third, fourth, and fifth course of action. Because sometimes, we all know that first contact things have to change. But then on top of that, if you haven't really developed what the other alternatives are, the other options are, then when some necessary component is no longer part of the system, like, how do you keep doing things? And so build in redundancy, build in people that are willing to help with goodwill. And then as time goes on, now it's do direct asks of people that have demonstrated the fact that they really believe in it and they've been around long enough, and say, hey, this is what I need you to do. And now I'm going to, now we need to see some sweat equity or some treasure that's being, and it is what it is. And so that's been probably the biggest journey, is just the personalities, is navigating the personalities.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, and helps me with back to what I learned. And you said something early on, and I really like the way that you put it, was the Monday morning dividends. So instead of the Monday morning quarterback, we have Monday morning dividends, and there's a lot to be said for that. By the way, we will never complain about plugs for Tribe and Purpose. Just like I will not complain about a shameless, selfless plug for Tribe and Purpose in our Green Beret Leadership Program. That's one of the things that we do with our Green Beret Leadership Program, is our implementation call. So it is, here's the slides, here's the reading, here's the lessons. Now let's talk about how you implement it into your life.
Mhm.
There's a lot to be said for that, and I like the way that you refer to it as Monday morning dividends. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, I want to add on that just to say, because as he was talking about that, I like that too, and I was thinking, gosh, I get that in rugby season so much of coming out of a big trip and it's different because it's such different strategy, but I think as I was kind of thinking about it, the personal things and the personalities and that kind of competitive stuff, I'm almost always learning something that I'm applying back into the business on that Monday. But no, for me, talk about the MBAs, it's like versus the military service and that kind of idea there. Patrick, you had said about how the MBA can kind of set you up for failure almost by being disillusioned to what it is. I know if I go back and read my first business plan, it is so perfect. It is exactly what you're supposed to do, and it didn't work at all, right? So it's like I know exactly what that's like, but it reminds me of a conversation, Dad, we had on the podcast months ago about that study around MBAs and how they were making businesses more profitable, but they weren't growing the pie. Was the big thing. And I think going back to kind of summarize our conversation today, what you're talking about a lot, Patrick, is growing that pie, not just making it profitable, not just like, look, hey, we made 2% more this month, whatever. It is, no, we are growing the actual business. We're connected with the community, all of that. So just love to see that approach because I think, as we all three know, that is the way we like to see business being done.
Yeah, and I guess what I learned. So,
hey, what did we talk about in the green room?
Which part?
Oh,
The lesson.
You gotta wait for the setup. You gotta wait for the
you
setup.
got to
Wait for the setup. My bad.
Oh,
I thought that was the setup. Is the
I got to.
No, you're too good at this.
I got to ask the question.
My bad.
No, there is no slack on 10X your team. If you want slack, cut the cord to your microphone. So,
All right, I'm ready.
Patrick, what'd you learn, man?
It's interesting. Thank you for asking the question. What I learned. So I think principally it's that just thankful for you, Camden, and you, Otis, having your different perspectives, and then always being a lifelong learner and accepting the fact that people have different perspectives of people's backgrounds, and then from that really narrowing it down instead of the sort of the shortcut that people can take is that if you're in this specific unit, if therefore you are better suited for whatever, is that you're actually narrowing it down really to characteristics instead. And that from those characteristics, you will probably find a predominance of people within certain communities, but you're not excluding people from other communities that may have those same characteristics and may have actually left those communities because they didn't find satisfaction. And so it's really focusing more on those root characteristics of lifelong learning, passion and purpose and devoting to people and ability to be to persevere. And then lastly, being something that demonstrates a tolerance toward risk.
Awesome. Patrick, how do folks find you, get in touch with you, learn more about Owners in Honor?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. The most direct path is if you're someone who's interested in selling a business to a veteran, then you can go to our website and click the Sell a Business. If you're a veteran who's interested in being part of a program and looking to acquire a business, same thing, go to our website, click on Buy a Business. And then our website is located at www.ownersinhonor.org. And otherwise, if you just Google us, you can find us on LinkedIn. And from that, you can find all of our content that we're creating. And then we'll be doing a monthly webcast as well that's going to cover both the entrepreneur, the seller, and then also subject matter experts such as yourself, Otis.
Awesome. Patrick, man, been a lot of fun. We appreciate you joining us today.
I appreciate being here. Thank you for inviting me and expect a return invite to one of the things that we're doing because I really appreciate all the stuff that Tribe and Purpose is doing too.
Awesome. Thanks. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Patrick Flood, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.